How's that
Right.
audio?
Sorry. All right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Catherine Ingmanson. I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters of the Fairfax area, and I will serve as your moderator this evening. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of Falls Church City, of Arlington and Alexandria City, and of the Fairfax area, I'd like to welcome all participants this evening and thank the many organizations who are co-sponsoring this event with us. Let me begin by underscoring that the League of Women Voters has always and will always remain a nonpartisan organization promoting and expanding the free and equitable access to voting to all eligible citizens. Human rights and human freedoms are not partisan issues. Moreover, the League does not endorse any candidate or political party. The fundamental mission of the League is to empower voters and defend democracy. Forums such as this are an essential part of informing voters on their candidates, and we are grateful you've all agreed to be with us tonight. We look forward to an open, courteous, and informative exchange of ideas. The format agreed on for tonight is each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement, 90 seconds to respond to questions, and 2 minutes for a closing statement. As a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be available for viewing later. All questions will be asked by the moderator and will be addressed to all candidates. Opening statements will be delivered by candidates in the order in which they appear on the ballot, and candidates will have the opportunity to respond first to questions in rotating order. Members of the audience have submitted questions in advance, and these have formed the basis for the questions that will be asked tonight. Members of the audience may also submit additional questions and comments through the chat function, and we'll monitor these submissions, incorporate them as appropriate and as time allows. If there are no questions from candidates, we'll proceed with Mr. Byers' opening statement, followed by Ms. Lippman and Mr. Ficre. Mr. Byer, would you go ahead?
Thank you very much, and good evening. Thanks so much for the invitation. This is at least my 5th League of Women Voters debate, and you always do a great job. And it's good democracy to be here with my friends Karina and Teddy. I'm before you humbly, gratefully to ask for your vote this November. I've cheerfully dedicated most of my adult life to public service, to putting people over politics. In the U.S. House these last years, I've tried to lead every major climate change effort. I authored 7 different pieces of the recent Inflation Reduction Act, including tax credits for commercial trucks and vans, and the first ever tax credits for actually taking carbon out of the atmosphere. I founded the Congressional Fusion Caucus and have been leading our bipartisan efforts to bring fusion energy to humanity in the next 10 years. Fusion is clean energy from water with no radioactive waste, the holy grail for cleaning our planet. I lead the suicide prevention efforts on the Hill with Republican John Katko. The new 988 suicide lifeline number went live this summer. We have appropriations to create barriers to suicide like nets on bridges. And we have a major effort to educate all citizens on how to recognize and prevent potential lost lives. I chair the Space Subcommittee. We recently smashed a small rocket into an asteroid to learn how to change the course of any future asteroid heading for impact with Earth. We want to avoid what happened to the dinosaurs. And we're going to go back to the moon on November 14th for the first trip to the moon and back in 50 years. I chair the Joint Economic Committee, working to overcome persistent inequities in wealth and income. I'm the lead sponsor of legislation to create bonds for poor children of all races and geography to help create a running start for kids as they reach adulthood. We've pushed antitrust efforts hard, and I'm the co-lead of legislation for a wealth tax on citizens whose net worths are over $100 million. I relish all of our opportunities to make differences in the lives of our local citizens. But the most meaningful work has been the 13,000 constituent cases we've done in the last 8 years. Everything from emergency passports, finding hospital beds, securing more than $10 million in refunds from the IRS and other agencies. This has been the most productive Congress since the 1960s. The largest infrastructure act in a generation, the CHIPS and Science Act, $52 billion for new semiconductors, and doubling the nation's investment in basic research. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually the largest environmental bill in human history. And the American Rescue Plan showed us we can lift most American children out of poverty with the child tax credit. Sure, we still have many mountains to climb. Gas prices have fallen, but inflation is still the scourge of the planet. The Fed keeps raising interest rates, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the shortage of labor everywhere in our country. and the challenge of so many people, young people with depression and anxiety, and the global warming that is already changing our country in dramatic ways. I love my job. It's hardest, but also the most fulfilling role I've ever had a chance to fulfill. I'm a relentless optimist, and I do my best to put people over politics in every situation. Serving in the U.S. Congress has been the greatest opportunity I've ever had to recognize the promise of every human being. So thank you, and I look forward to doing my best to answer your questions tonight.
All right, thank you. Ms. Lipsman, would you like to go next? Do you have an opening statement?
I do. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having us tonight. It's truly a pleasure to be here tonight with the League of Women Voters, especially being that I'm the only woman on this ballot and only the third female to be nominated for this seat. So my name is Karina Lipsman. I was born in Odessa, Ukraine. I came to this country on a refugee visa when, I'm sorry. When I was 8 years old, and came here with my single mother and my grandparents. We didn't speak English, lived in low-income housing, on food stamps, and I went through the Baltimore public school system. And you can imagine my first day of school was extremely, extremely terrifying because I didn't speak the language. So when all of the kids around me stood up and began to recite the Pledge of Allegiance, and I had no idea what it meant, I was mortified, but I knew deep down it was something that I wanted to be a part of. So I went through the Baltimore public school system. And when I turned 18, I became an American citizen by choice. And during that swearing in ceremony, I recited the most meaningful Pledge of Allegiance of my life, because in that moment, I knew how fortunate I was to have the opportunity that many around the world can only dream of, because America is truly the greatest country in the world. So I knew that I had to live my American dream, and that meant that I had to work hard because nothing was given to me. I put myself through college in 3 years with a bachelor's in economics while I was working in the financial industry. I then switched gears and moved into the defense and intelligence community. And of course, as a woman, I always had to prove myself. So I had to go back to school, earn a master's in engineering from Johns Hopkins so I could have a seat at the table. And I've done a lot of very cool things. I've launched satellite. I worked on the James Webb Hubble telescope. I've worked with leaders across the globe on their national security. And I'm very proud of the service that I have dedicated to this country, who has given so much to me. But this past January, I decided to resign from a 14-year career to run for Congress full-time, because I felt that the American dream was slipping away for so many and continues to slip away for the next generation. I'm focused on kitchen table issues, getting inflation under control, fixing our supply chains, getting crime under control. Our crime has been rampant in our area, especially in Northern Virginia. I've seen true crime in Baltimore City, where I live, where I would walk to school and I would hear gunshots. I would be afraid to walk by myself. And I feel the same way now in Arlington as a single female, not being able to do the things that I used to do even 2 years ago, like take a walk or fill up my car at a gas station in the evenings when it's dark. And education. Education is a huge part of our country, and that's what sets us apart from those around the world. And the education system is currently failing our children. We have seen lower test scores. We have seen where our standards have been lowered, and that is not acceptable. This is the future of our country, so we should be supporting that. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion tonight, looking forward to answering your questions and earning your support and your vote on November 8th. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much for that. Mr. Fikri, would you like to go now? You are still muted.
I'm sorry. I have technical difficulties over here. This is what happens when you have limited staff and you run a one-man operation for the most part, outside of the volunteers that are working with me. Anyways, all that being said, hello, my name is Teddy Fikri, and I'm running for Congress here in the 8th Congressional District. This is my first time running for political office, not only for Congress, but for any political office. So I bring a different perspective to this race. I'm a first-generation immigrant from Ethiopia. Virginia is truly my home away from home. When I arrived here as a political refugee in 83 at the age of 8 years old. And I pretty much grew up in Northern Virginia. In fact, the first place that I arrived in America was in Arlington. Attended Mount Vernon Elementary School in Delray. And then, attended George Mason University, attained my MBA from Johns Hopkins University, and been pretty much living in the Alexandria and Arlington area since I graduated from college. So like I said, I bring a different perspective. There's a vast disconnect between what we're being told every day about how great this economy is, how unemployment is so low. But that is not the reality that most of us are feeling. The reality that we're feeling is economic uncertainties, for too many, economic insolvency. I've actually experienced two sides of the American life. One, in terms of attaining the American dream, being able to go to college, get an MBA, work at consulting firms, supporting the Department of Defense. But I've also seen the other side. In 2014, my position came to an end. And shortly thereafter, I made some bad business decisions and I was homeless for 2.5 years. And in fact, it was those 2.5 years of homelessness, of despair, of to be quite frank, bitterness. Also, there's a lot of grief that comes with losing everything. But through that heartache, I actually learned a lot. And in fact, I learned a lot more through those 2.5 years than I did attending Johns Hopkins or George Mason. And what I learned is about the value of our common humanity. When you're down in your luck and you're not even sure where the next meal is coming from, you learn about the value of our common humanity, and that when it comes to human suffering, it transcends all our differences. And that's what's compelling me to run. I feel as though our politics, thanks in large part, if not almost solely in part, to this balkanizing of America based on red or blue, based on ideologies and identity, we've lost sense of who we are and what we have in common, which is the fact that almost all of us belong in the same ship of economic uncertainty. And this country stopped working for us a long time ago. It's enriching a few and impoverishing many. So it's time that our Congress actually represents us instead of becoming what it has become, which is a country club where millionaires are working for billionaires and the rest of us are just being given lip service and being gaslighted on a daily basis without having any tangible actions that benefit us. So that's why I'm running. Obviously, I'm no longer homeless, but yet still the struggle continues. I'm working full time and driving Uber part time. So I don't have to feel your pains. I'm living your reality every day, and that's why I'm running for Congress. Thank you.
All right, thank you, all of you. Just a reminder, we will have time limits even in the answering the questions, and our timekeeper has the power of the mute button. I will remind everyone. All right, well, first of all, in order to make sure that everyone gets a chance to go first, I'll address the first question to Ms. Litzman first, and then if Mr. Ficre and Mr. Beyer can answer subsequently. So to start off with a broad general question, what specifically would be your top priorities for congressional action were you elected?
So thank you so much for that question. And as I'm traveling around the district and talking to people, the economy has been at the top. And we've seen how our current administration has handled inflation. We continue to see tax hikes. Even today, the numbers came out that inflation is still higher than we expected. So we need to fix our supply chains. We need to start manufacturing here in the US. We need to provide tax incentives to companies to do business here in the States so we can put our men and women in high paying quality jobs and get people to start working again. We also need to get back to energy independence. I believe in an all of the above energy policy. We should be not subsidizing companies like General Motors or Ford and giving them tax breaks, because they can be using their own research and development dollars to create breakthrough technologies, whereas we should be subsidizing, or I'm sorry, giving tax credits to startup companies who want to come in, who want to get into the new technology and breakthrough technology, so we can have a cleaner economy. We should also not tax the small businesses as much as we do. Small businesses have suffered significantly over the last 2 years with the closure due to COVID, and they continue to have more and more regulations put on them, and they are suffering and not thriving. So thank you so much for that question.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Ficre?
Sure. Thank you for that question.
All right.
Yeah, by far the number one priority that I'm going to place if I'm elected by people here in the 8th Congressional District is the economy. And the way over the past 14 years, really a lot longer than that, the way that the economy has been catered to benefit very few and endangering so many. If you look at the policies that both Republicans and Democrats have been passing over the past 14 years alone, and we go back further than that, it's really been to enrich Wall Street and to decimate Main Street. And so it's been this discredited notion of trickle-down economy has been adopted, putting beside the talking points to the contrary by both political parties. And that's because both political parties are captive to multinational corporations. We're seeing on a yearly basis where wealth is being transferred upward and poverty is being transferred downward. Again, this is not a reality, it's something I experienced firsthand. Somewhere up to 7% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. The net savings of Americans is zero. And now after 14 years of using gimmicks like quantitative easing, like zero interest rate policies, which have all benefited Wall Street in order to incentivize people to invest in equity at the cost of the average American savings, we're now looking at the Federal Reserve inducing a recession, which further punishes homeowners and workers and middle class and small businesses. So we need to reorient this economy to be more focused on entrepreneurship, small businesses, and stop being so overly dependent and giving the wealth of this and the resources of this country to multinational corporations that have zero loyalty and interest in really preserving our way of life here in America. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right, Mr. Byer, could you now address the question as to what your priorities would be?
Sure, there are many, but
Specific priorities.
The priority that I started with 8 years ago remains today, which is to do the best I can to be the strongest, clearest voice fighting climate change that I can. All these other things are important. Crime's important, the economy is important, transportation. But unless we have a planet we can live on, right now, the entire west coast of America is on fire, in Washington and Oregon and California. And we see climate change impacts all over the world. The United Nations estimates that 1 billion people will be homeless, displaced by the year 2050 unless we act. And so I've done everything I can to move us in that direction. Of course, the economy is incredibly important. I chair the Joint Economic Committee, and the central focus there is how do we get the economy not just to grow more quickly, but to be more evenly spread so that folks that were in Teddy's situation can have good jobs, good incomes, the opportunity to buy a home. Yes, inflation is terrible. We didn't like this morning's numbers. The good news was that most of that was airfare and healthcare. In fact, goods for the second straight month had no increase at all. We see the Fed raising interest rates again and again. We have to hope that it will be a soft landing. But inflation, as painful as it is, there will come a time 2 years from now, 3 years from now, whenever, when we have that back under control. But we've got to get climate change under control or we won't be able to do it at all. And then, of course, maybe beyond climate change in the economy, the biggest priority for me is overcoming the divisions in our country, where we have right and left so divided, such different understandings of our history, of our shared facts. It seems to me that the country is as divided as it's been since the Civil War. And I continue to try to do all I can to heal that division.
Catherine, you're muted.
All right. Thank you. For our next question, I'll ask Mr. Ficre to go first, followed by Mr. Byer and Ms. Lipsman. So there are many residents and constituents in District 8 who have some affiliation with the military. We received many questions related to military issues from members of the audience in advance of tonight's program. So the question is, given that there are so many people affiliated with the military in the district, what is your strategy to support and represent these military constituents?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So first and foremost, we need to do a lot more to take care of the men and women who are taking care of this country. One of the things that I really used to pay attention to, and it used to bother me, is that as a defense consultant back, when I used to work at the Pentagon at Fort Belvoir, is that I was making north of six figures, while those who are enlisted are making around $40,000, $50,000. The priorities of this nation are really upside down, where those who are basically involved in, I don't know what else to call it, but gambling on Wall Street are making fortunes, and those who are at the head of the military-industrial complex are making fortunes, but yet those who are keeping our nation safe are scraping by. In fact, one of the things that really broke my heart, in fact, when I became homeless, not too late, longer after I lost my job at Booz Allen Hamilton, is the sheer number of people that were homeless that were actually veterans. I befriended a lot of homeless vets over the past during that 2 years. They are some of the kindest and wisest people. In fact, a lot of them encouraged me over the years. So we need to do more to take care of soldiers that are coming back from wars broken, by the traumas of seeing, the horrors of wars. And if that means we give less money to the Boeings and the Northrop Grummers of the world in order to take care of those who are serving our nation, that's what we must do. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Byer?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. I'm an Army brat. My dad was West Point and actually lived there for a couple of years. So I see that from the family perspective rather than having served in uniform. My primary concern has been the lives of the enlisted men and women. I've been to the Lorton Food Bank a couple of times and have been very disturbed to see how many military spouses were there with their kids getting the free food because they weren't paid enough. And I've been part of the Fort Belvoir problem over the years, trying to fix the Army housing there, where the mold problem has driven many of the people really crazy. My particular niche has been military spouses. I've worked very closely with the Military Spousal Association, specifically because when you move every 2 years, because your husband, your wife is getting a new assignment, it's very difficult to have any kind of meaningful job or career because you're just bounced from one place to another. I'm also, I spent much of my adult life in the automobile business. And the enlisted men and women are the ones who get particularly cheated often in automobile sales, especially the used automobile sales. So I'm a very strong supporter of the CFPB, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Those are the people trying to protect these peaks from 20%, 25% interest rates. And I will say too, as a Democrat, I'm very proud that when Governor McAuliffe was governor, we were the first state in the nation to guarantee no homelessness to Virginia veterans. That at that point, every Virginia veteran was offered a home. Some chose not to take it for different reasons. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. All right, Miss. Where? Okay, Ms. Lipsman?
Well, thank you so much for that question. So someone who has spent the last 14 years in the defense and intelligence community, obviously this is a very personal topic for me. I know what the threats are that we face here in the United States, and that's Russia, China, and North Korea. I speak Russian. I have held some of the highest security clearances there are, and I have led delegations in dozens of countries on 6 continents. So I understand the sacrifices that our military has made along with their families. And I'm ready to lead on day one and support them. And for starters, I would love to be on appropriations, specifically the Defense Subcommittee, to help support the over 70,000 federal employees and the Pentagon in this district. I want to take care of our military, our veterans, and their family. And I'm proud to be endorsed by the American Veterans Vote and also the Disabled Veterans PAC, both who have done an absolutely outstanding job in working with our veterans. We also need to reform the VA. Right now, the process of getting benefits takes forever. And our military families and veterans are suffering because of that, because they're not getting the proper care that they need in an appropriate amount of time. So this is something that I look forward to doing. Also, as an innovation point, using the GI Bill for more than just education, but perhaps using it to start a small business and getting our military and veterans once they return to be able to do what they need to do in terms of assimilating back into society, but also thriving. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. For the next question, I want to get at an issue that is very near and dear to the activities of the League. So the question is, what legislation would you propose or support to ensure free and fair access to the polls for all eligible citizens? And what would you do to help ensure election security? Mr. Byer, I believe this one's yours first.
Thank you, Catherine. The very first thing I do would be to try to get the John Lewis Act through the House again. It's passed twice already, but also actually get the Senate to pass it, either with 60 votes or get rid of the filibuster, if only for that bill to pass it. The John Lewis Act fixes what the Supreme Court did in 2012 when it said systemic racial injustice was no longer a problem in voting in America. And we know that's not true. And since that thing, we've had many, many states introduce legislation to restrict voters' access, which has been a sad thing. The second thing I do would be, the bill is called HR 1, it's the Democracy Act, would be to try to reduce the role of money in politics, get rid of gerrymandering across the country, at least for all federal races, and make sure that the districts are chosen by independent commissions or by the people rather than by the politicians themselves. And I voted, by the way, and lobbied for the Virginia constitutional change, which has given us among the least gerrymandered districts in the country. And then as legislators, we don't have anything to do with the Supreme Court case coming up, but it is very concerning. The Republican jurist Luttig said that it could be the most important case in 250 years. Supreme Court's going to look at whether state legislatures can ignore their governor, they can ignore their constitution, and ignore the voters and decide who won an election rather than having the votes decide the election. The great threat right now is not so much who shows up, but rather who gets to count the votes. With that, I yield back.
Catherine, we can't hear you.
Wait, okay. I think I've got it.
Who's next?
Ms. Lipsman, can you address the question next?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So we live in America, which is one of the greatest countries in the world. I came from Soviet Ukraine, so I really understand what corruption looks like, especially in the political system where democracy is not an option. And we're just so fortunate to be able to vote, to have the opportunity to choose our candidates and choose our elected officials. And I've traveled around the world as well, where I've seen my share or, fair share of corruption in other political systems. But we here in America have one of the best election systems in the world. And sure, is there room for improvement and opportunity? Absolutely, there always is. But we truly do have the best legal system. And I do look forward to reviewing the bills that Congressman Byer just mentioned in more detail. But one thing is clear. We must ensure that people feel secure to vote and that we have elected officials and poll watchers who have integrity. And that's something that we really should be concentrating on. So thank you so much for that question.
Mr. Ficre, sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, let's get one thing straight. I love America, but it's time that we start speaking truths here. There is rampant corruption in America, and it's by way of corporate contributions, quote unquote contributions. They're really akin to bribes. Mitt Romney was widely lampooned when he said that corporations are people, but he was actually speaking the truth. The Supreme Court codified that, in fact, corporations do have personhood. And Citizens United went beyond that and gave corporations and unknown billionaires, many of whom might not even be here, to basically inundate our elections with all kinds of unaccountable and dark money. So, with the advent of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, to run a campaign, then it leaves out everyday people. In fact, that's what compelled me to run. I'm not taking a penny from corporations, and I'm running the independent for a reason. It's to make a point that we cannot have a government that works for us when it's been commandeered by the money of special interests and billionaires. And to this extent, both political parties are completely captive to this. There's no difference. So until we get to the point where we actually, loosen the amount of impact that one check of a billionaire has, which effectively vitiates the voices of tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans, then we're basically, it's a dog and pony show. And so we need to do more to take money out of our elections and make merit, not how much wealth someone has, be the reason that people win elections. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Right, the next question I'll address to Ms. Litzman first. This is another one that was very popular amongst folks who sent in questions ahead of time. So rents and evictions are rising across the county and the region. Hundreds of thousands of people across Virginia struggle to afford necessities because they're paying more than 50% of their income for housing, and thousands more are facing eviction. If elected, what federal measures would you support to address these challenges?
So thank you so much for that question. I mean, this is something that's been an issue for quite some time now. And I think it started with the root cause, which is mental health. In the 1970s, the federal government decided that they were going to close down mental health institutions. And so from that, we've seen an increase in homelessness. There's a huge homeless crisis around the country that leads to addiction, drug and alcohol abuse. It also leads to crime. And so these are things that we need to really focus on and provide more funding and resources to shelters so that people can feel safe being in shelters if they're homeless, to get them back on track, to be able to afford housing, to be able to get a job and have a stable life. Really, that's what these people need, and they don't need to be on the street, and they shouldn't be on the street. I've talked to a group here in Arlington called Path Forward, who supports affordable housing for homeless people, and has done a fantastic job of getting people off the streets and into homes. And again, it goes back to making sure that we provide support for everyone and are equitable so that people have the opportunity to live a thriving, prosperous life and be afforded the opportunities and freedom that America has to offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ficre?
Sure, thank you. Again, a lot of times the establishment or the political insiders kind of always like to talk about the symptoms and rarely address the root cause. The root cause, and by the way, when it comes to issues of homelessness, this is not something that just impacts the quote unquote least amongst us. As evidenced by what happened to me 7 years ago, almost all of us are 1 to 2 missed paychecks away from that level of despair. In fact, that's why mental health is, the issues of depression, anxiety, and worse is skyrocketing. Again, that too is a symptom. When people feel like they cannot, keep up with the bills, they have to, negotiate between paying rent or being able to have healthy food. These things lead to a lot of despair that ultimately lead to a lot of mental health issues. But again, the root cause is the consolidation of marketplaces. America has been turned into a land of riches for the few and crumbles for the rest of us, because you have effectively monopolies almost across every sector, with consolidation of marketplaces. Competition are being driven out, small businesses are being driven out left and right. And you have a few dominant players that are able to dictate price, and we have fewer and fewer choices. So what we need is to do exactly what Teddy Roosevelt did in the early 1900s, and break up these monopolies and restore competition, and reorient our economy towards where we live, instead of outsourcing all our power to DC and to multinational corporations overseas. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Byer?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Let me break this into a couple of pieces. The first big housing issue is just the availability of housing for the people with the smallest incomes. You have the so-called low-income housing. It's estimated that we need 150,000 more housing units just in metropolitan Washington, 10 million across the country right now. I have been the co-lead with a member of Congress from Washington for a couple of years on expanding the low-income housing tax credit by 50%. Again, we've gotten it through the House a couple of times. We need to get it through the Senate. It should be bipartisan. It would add 2 million more housing units over the next 8 years for America's working poor. But it's not just that, because there's an awful lot of middle-income people who can't afford to buy a house, especially in Northern Virginia. Our young people may be raised in Fairfax and Arlington, Alexandria, but then they've got to move a couple of counties out to afford a house. And a lot of that comes from zoning. There's a vigorous debate in Arlington right now over the so-called missing middle. And it's going to take some wise political leaders to find the right middle ground. But we certainly need to know that the more housing we make available on existing land, the more affordable it can become. I'm also very fond of a piece of legislation that my friend Senator Mark Warner is working on, and I hope to help him on it, which would make it possible for first-time homebuyers, not first personally, but the first in the family. Your parents didn't live in their own home, their grandparents didn't live in it, to buy a house for the first time. It's one of the great ways that Americans have built wealth over the years. And by really, I won't go on because I get the stop button, but there's some good proposals to try to make that happen.
Great. All right, thank you very much. All right, the next question will go to you first, Mr. Ficre. What do you think Congress should do to address the high cost of secondary education and high student debt? Should Congress provide more support for vocational education?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, there's no reason why students have to go to college and come out 6 figures in debt and are indentured into a life of basically economic bondage the minute that they graduate from college. College and higher education, how we get there, maybe a lot of it is also predicated based on the choices that we make. But college and higher education should not be a for-profit venture. We should turn this into a nonprofit. And also, for those who have racked up all kinds of debt, 14 years ago, billionaires who recklessly gambled with the life savings of tens of millions of Americans, if not hundreds of millions, and billions around the world, not only did they get off scot-free, they were bailed out and made even more money. So there was no hesitance to forgive their debt. But yet, when it comes to forgiving the debts of students, there's all types of recrimination. The truth of it is, if you forgive college student loans, that money will be reinvested back into the economy. And you will actually, you also go a long way in terms of addressing some of these issues like mental health, because when students are unable to keep up with their bills and then have to work 2 or 3 jobs at a time, then that leads to a lot of issues as well. So again, we should reorient this economy towards assisting workers and small businesses And part of that would be to forgive student loans. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Byer?
Thank you. This is a very complicated subject, but let me just say first that I support what the president's done recently in terms of forgiving the student debt up to $10,000 for many students and $20,000 for those that have Pell Grants. I know it's in the courts. I don't know ultimately whether it will happen, but he worked for a long time to make sure that this forgiveness was hitting the people who are most burdened by that student debt. But that's just a short-term fix. The middle-term fix is to try to figure out what has driven up the cost of higher education so much more quickly than inflation. When I went, it was $4,000 a year. Now, many colleges, it's 60, 70,000. Some of our heavily subsidized public universities are still 20,000. One of the things that's changed too is that if you look at the Virginia schools, UVA, William and Mary, ODU, et cetera, it used to be that most of their funding came from the state government. Now, very little does. They're not, we used to joke, it's no longer state supported, as sort of just a blink of the eye at it. So a greater commitment from state and local governments would help also. But then trying to figure out within the institution what's driven up the cost, because it's not necessarily, more or better professors. And then whatever we can do to make sure that those who can least afford it can do that. I'm a strong supporter of doubling Pell Grants and making sure that a college education is available for everyone who actually wants one. And that's basically a public choice that we have to make.
Thank you very much. All right, Ms. Lipsman?
Thank you so much for that question. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart. Obviously, when I first came here, I did not speak English, so I relied on the English as a second language program that helped me learn English, but also has helped millions of people who come here as immigrants learn English as well. I went through the Baltimore public school system and I obtained a bachelor's degree in 3 years, and I paid my way through that. I did not take any loans out. And I also have an advanced degree in engineering from Johns Hopkins. But a 4-year career should not be a prerequisite for employment in this country. I believe that we should destigmatize trade schools and technical and vocational programs. These are opportunities where people can go into high paying quality jobs, but also learn entrepreneurial skills. This is extremely, extremely important to the success of our country, because people are coming out right now in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and they can't find jobs. They resort to working at a Starbucks or supplementing their income in other ways. And we know the costs are so high in Northern Virginia, so people can't afford to buy homes here or even live here. But our education system also needs to be better. We should have more transparency into what happens in the hallways, what's being taught in the classroom, making sure that the educational standards continue to rise and not lower them, because it ends up hurting those who most need it. And those are the minority and immigrant communities. So thank you so much for that question.
All right, thank you very much. Going back in order now, I believe, Mr. Byer, you'll be the first one to address the next question, which is, what are your proposals to enact a comprehensive immigration reform for the country?
Oh, Catherine, it's been one of my great frustrations the 8 years I've been there, because we've been unable to get anything meaningful done on a congressional level. Part of it is that there's been an insistence from both the right and the left that immigration reform is quote unquote comprehensive. And because we can't get everybody on the same page at the same time, it hasn't happened. I would start, number one, with getting a clear path to citizenship for all of our dreamers. We have many, many in Northern Virginia, at Marymount, at Northern Virginia Community College, at George Mason. Many of them now are in their mid-30s. Who've spent most of their lives here. The second thing I do is a path to citizenship for the temporary protective status people. Again, many in Northern Virginia, mostly from El Salvador and some from Haiti. The third thing I do would be to start bringing in many more people legally. We only brought in 250,000 last year legally, and every business I know is struggling for employees. We need nurses and doctors and dental hygienists and auto mechanics and electricians and et cetera, et cetera. We need to get back to 1.5 million per year, especially with our low birth rate. We already have 60,000 Customs Border Patrol people at the border. We turned back 2 million people already this year. But we have a 1 million backlog in the immigration courts. I would do the very best I can to put more money into those judges to clear the immigration courts as quickly as we can, which, by the way, strengthens what we do at the southern border. There's much more that we can do, but time is running out. One of the things we do want to point out, though, is that we are a country built on immigration, and we need to respect that and continue that tradition.
Thank you very much. Ms. Litzman?
Thank you for the question. Obviously, as a refugee immigrant myself, I know how important citizenship is, and America is built on immigrants, and we need to continue to allow more and more immigrants to come in here legally because they truly want to come here and escape their oppressive regimes and come here for freedoms and opportunities. That's why we're all here. And for me, it's really about getting a clear path to citizenship, like Congressman Beyer talked about. The process is currently so arduous, it's impossible to navigate. And someone who doesn't understand the culture, someone who doesn't speak the language, doesn't know where to go. And the resources are not so clear, cut and dry to where they can easily navigate. So I think we need to create a clearer path to citizenship so that people can learn the language, get an education, get a job, pay their taxes, and assimilate into society. I also think that we need to secure our southern border. Right now, we've seen an overwhelming amount of weapons and drugs, especially fentanyl, coming into the United States. This is hurting Northern Virginia the most. We've seen fentanyl overdoses in our school systems, in our communities. And that's an issue because our southern border is not secure right now. I've worked in the defense industry, and I understand what it takes to have 21st century technology, fund our DHS agents in order to secure that border so that we don't allow illegal immigrants who want to destroy our country to come in, but we do allow those who actually want to be here to be here. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Fikre.
Sure. Like almost every other issue, contentious issue before us, immigration is no different in that there's a reason why election cycle after election cycle, there's always rhetoric on both sides of the political aisle, but nothing gets done. That's because gridlock and Americans, having continuous state of conflict about this benefits those who are in power, and it distracts us from the issues that really impact all of our lives as well. As a first generation immigrant, of course, America should be a land of immigrants and welcoming to immigrants. I'm blessed because of this, and so is my family, and so are countless millions of people who become citizens on a yearly basis. But on a broader level, if we want to address the issues that are impacting the immigrant community and make it possible for people who are residing in the shadows to actually become everyday citizens, we have to get away from this Republican versus Democrat issue and actually start electing independents, because again, irrespective of what Congressman Beyer says or Ms. Lipscomb says, the political parties they belong to thrive off these issues by turning issues that are important into contentious and red meat issues that pit us against each other. So perhaps if we actually elect independents who are not wedded to either party, we could get solutions done instead of gaslighting and just deciding people all the time without getting anything done in terms of solutions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. All right, from immigration, I'd like to turn to national security for a moment. Ms. Lipsman, you'll be the first to address the question, and it's kind of two parts. The first is, what do you see as our most urgent national security challenges? But as part of that, would you continue to support our aid to Ukraine in defense of the Russian invasion? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. So as someone who spent the last 14 years in the defense and intelligence community, I can tell you right now, our three biggest threats are China, Russia, and North Korea. I am ready to start on day one. I have spent more time in SCIFs, aka closed areas, briefing top level officials on what we should be doing across the board and to make sure that we're protecting the US and we're also maintaining our stance as the global leader. People look to America as an example of how to lead, and we need to continue to be number one on the world stage. So I have worked across many different countries on 6 different continents. I speak multiple languages. I speak Russian fluently. I can have a negotiation with President Putin, and I understand exactly where he's coming from because I've lived under the Soviet regime. So I would be ready on day one to get to work and protect our nation. Your second part was on Ukraine and providing aid. So I'm from Ukraine. I still have family in Ukraine. We still have friends there. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to watch my birth country being shelled on a daily basis. And the escalation of potential nuclear weapons and warfare is even more disturbing. But I do not believe that we should be sending blank checks, billions and billions of dollars to Ukraine without any transparency or accountability. Our charity starts at home, and we have a crisis here in the United States that we need to take care of first. So while I support humanitarian and defensive aid, I do not support blank checks to any foreign country. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Fiecre.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So the number one national security issue is here, right here in America, in terms of the continued deterioration of the economy, the continued economic uncertainty and anxieties that more and more people are undergoing, which has become part of our daily routine, inflation that's going through the roof. And we could very well be looking at the reprise of what happened in 2007/2008. We could be looking at the second coming of the Great Recession. Except this time, there is no backstop. The Federal Reserve does not necessarily have the tools if there is a big recession by way of, by lowering interest rates, because they're already low enough as it is. There's probably no political appetite to do all types of stimulus spending. So we could be looking at a knife that falls without anything to catch it. So that's the issue that is literally knocking at the door, at almost everyone's doors. When it comes to the issues taking place in Ukraine, as a first generation immigrant from Ethiopia, I witnessed, I didn't witness it, but my grandparents witnessed what happened when Italy invaded Ethiopia, and upwards of 1 million people were killed by fascism. But yet, one thing that we cannot continue to do is this endless military expedition around the world, these wars of choices. We need to reinvest in America. Let us lead by example, and because there's a lot of people that are suffering and buckling under the weight of economic uncertainties. And instead of enriching the military-industrial complex, let's actually invest in America. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Byer?
Oh, thank you. I have a different perspective. I think by far the most important national security issue we face is climate change. And I think most of the generals and admirals would agree with me, that the best leaders are always the ones who are looking farthest down the road, not at the next month or the next year, but the next decade and the next generation. And climate change is the thing that has the ability, the threat of killing tens, even hundreds of millions of people around the globe. And we're already seeing what it's doing to America and how many of our problems are piling up because of hurricanes and storms and fires and droughts. California right now is in the worst drought it's had since 850 AD, which I think is about 1,300 years ago. The second biggest challenge is energy. We have made ourselves so dependent on fossil fuels that it's used as a weapon against us by the Saudis, by the Russians, by the Venezuelans, by the Iranians. I've worked very hard on trying to make fusion energy actually happen, not 30 years from now, but in this decade or early the next decade, and get off of the fossil fuel thing. Fossil fuel has driven our foreign policy much to our detriment. And the third thing, of course, is China, but not because I'm afraid that China is going to invade us, but there is a great power competition. We want our vision of a liberal democracy, not their party-driven dictator autocracy to prevail. You know, we're competing against each other all over the world. We're also actually working together on so many things that we buy from them and that they buy from us. We're very interdependent, but at the same time, that challenge is one that we have to rise to. But the best way we rise is by educating and strengthening our own people.
All right, thank you very much for that. For the next question, I'm going to return to some domestic issues. And in particular, the recent Supreme Court decision from the last session. What actions, if any, do you believe that Congress should take in light of the Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization decision? Mr. Fikre, I think this is your round to start.
Sorry, you broke up a little bit. Was that with respect to the Roe v. Wade decision?
I'm sorry, the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization decision from the Supreme Court at the end of the last session.
Sure. So look, where I stand on this issue is when it comes to the women's choice, it's something that government should not be involved in at all. Ultimately, as long as the decisions that everyday Americans make, whether it's women with their bodies, or the decisions, the lifestyle decisions that all of us make in the privacy of our own homes, that is not something to be debated and decided by DC or anyone else. As long as people's decisions do not infringe upon the freedoms of other people, then they should be able to lead their lives without imposition, without being dictated to. So that's why I stand on that. But at the same token, this issue, again, it's just like every other issue in America. It's meant to keep Americans perpetually at each other's throats. If people like the issue of abortion matters to, quote unquote, I hate referring to people as the other side, but those who care about from another perspective, there's by giving women the means to actually earn more money and have equal pay for equal work and have more opportunities in life, then the number of abortions could go down, not by imposition, but because when women have the means to take care of themselves, then they make decisions that might not necessarily lead towards abortion, but towards being able to have a family. So it's by being able to invest in Americans directly that we could arrive at these issues with some level of solutions instead of continuously pitting people against each other. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Byer?
Thank you, Catherine. I disagreed very strenuously with the Dobbs decision. I thought that I read the opinion by Justice Alito, and I thought it was very poorly argued. I mean, he makes the case that abortion isn't mentioned in the Constitution. Maybe many have pointed out that women aren't mentioned in the Constitution either. However, what do we go from here? Because I respect as the Supreme Court has acted. In the short run, I think state after state is going to try to enact the provisions that they can. Some will ban it completely. Some, like Vermont, will try to put it into their constitution. I am hoping that Virginia in the years to come will put it in our constitution. I know that's not what our current governor wants, but we will see what the will of the people works out. The U.S. House has already passed legislation to put Roe v. Wade into federal law. It's not passed in the Senate. I hope we will continue to elect senators that move us in that direction. In the meantime, over many, many years, I've always tried to find the constructive thing that I can do. For 9 years, I served on the board of the DC campaign to prevent teen pregnancy, on the theory that if we can prevent the pregnancy in the first place, abortion doesn't become an issue. I was very proud of one of the provisions of the Affordable Care Act was making birth control available at no cost to people that had that ACA insurance. And not surprisingly, the number of abortions went down the most it had been since Roe v. Wade because of that ACA Act. And anything we can do to make planning to prevent an unwanted pregnancy available to all women, I think, gets us in the right direction for all time, while we continue to try to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land.
Great, thank you. And finally, Ms. Lipsman.
So as the only woman in this race and also the third ever to be nominated, none by the Democratic Party, mind you, I believe that the decision was left to the states, and that's where it should be. People should, especially women, should not have the federal government telling them what to do with their bodies. We should be investing in education for teen pregnancy, for women who are in poverty, who are not able to support themselves or be able to support a child, and give them options, give them an education. It's okay to give your child up for adoption. Our adoption system in this country is awful. My cousin tried to, him and his wife could not have children naturally. And so they had to adopt a child, and they had to go through the adoption process here in the States, and they were deemed unfit to be parents. Both have zero criminal records or any background of violence or of abuse, very much have high paying jobs, very successful, but they had to go to Guatemala to adopt their son. That's unacceptable. There are children here that deserve good homes, that deserve a safe space, to flourish, to be able to grow up and enjoy the benefits of this country. So we need to invest more in our education, and we need to invest more in reforming our adoption process. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for that response. Now, I understand, Mr. Byer, that you have to leave a little bit early. If possible, I'd like to ask one more question, and then you can give your closing statement. If the other candidates are willing to stay for a few more questions, we do have the forum until 8:30. So all right. The next question I'd like to ask, in light of the gun violence problem across the country, do you support federal legislation to further address it? And if so, what would that legislation be?
And Catherine, that's for me to start, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm very, very much believe in this. And there's so many different things that I would like to see us do. My youngest child now works for the Brady campaign, deeply involved in trying to do gun safety measures. Obviously, we passed the first meaningful gun legislation in 30 years this year in a bipartisan way, which was a start. But the next thing I would do would be to pass not universal background checks, but ban all assault weapons. When we did that before, there were something like 20,000 assault weapons. At the end, there are now something like 20 million out of the 400 million weapons we have right now are assault weapons. The next thing I do is, I've had legislation for this a number of years, is to strengthen the ATF. Right now, a federally licensed firearm dealer is only, they're supposed to be surveyed every single year. The average is once every 12 years. So there are many good folks, but there are a lot of bad folks too. And overall, the hardest part is changing the gun culture. You know, we're one of only two nations, I believe, that has more guns than people. We're one of the most dangerous nations of the world because of that. And I don't think it's all the people that own guns legally. It's the ones that are illegal and get in other people's hands. So, and obviously, I'm very much for a universal red flag law to make sure that when people are in a psychiatric crisis, they or their family members can request of a judge that the guns be taken away until that crisis is over. But there's a much bigger agenda than that. We've been able to get virtually none of it done except a little bill this year. And I will continue to fight for common sense gun measures wherever I possibly can.
Ms. Lipsman, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Byer.
Thank you. So my opponent, Mr. Byer, supports taxing the gun manufacturers by 1,000%. That's the same thing as trying to tax General Motors or Ford and prevent them from having car accidents. I mean, that's just silly. That's not governing. So I support common sense laws when it comes to gun policy. I think that people who have a background of abuse, gun violence, etc., should not necessarily own a gun, or there should be specified time for which you can purchase a gun until you actually pick up that gun. Nothing has to be done right away. And then the root cause of this all is going back to mental health. we have a huge mental health problem. And a lot of these people who want to hurt themselves or others are still going to do that with or without a gun. They can use other forms of weaponry like hammer attacks, which we've seen in Arlington. You can use screwdrivers, any other thing. If they really want to hurt themselves, they're going to hurt themselves. And so this is where we really need to focus on investing in mental health and making sure that we provide them the best opportunity to be safe and keep others around them safe as well. Thank you so much for that question.
Great, thank you. Mr. Ficre?
So thank you for that question. Yeah, so this is an issue that I care about as well. Obviously, every time you turn on the news, it seems like on a regular basis, you hear more and more horrific outcomes. And as a father of a 3-year-old, I almost dread as to what's going to be coming up for my child when he goes to school as well. But all that being said, I feel as though this issue is just yet another issue to pit people against each other without really arriving at a solution. I do believe in common sense gun reform, but I'm also very reticent that every time there's a national tragedy, some type of crisis, that the first reaction that we have is to look at people's rights. This happened with the so-called Patriot Act, where our rights to privacy was stripped away, and we never got them back. And so again, I came to America because crisis after crisis were being leveraged by government in order to take away people's rights. And beyond that, at the end of the day, we need to start really addressing the root cause of these things. I know it's when some horrific shooting happens in Uvalde or Parkland, we pay attention, but every day there are thousands of suicide attempts by students in high school. The state of mental health amongst the student population is mind-boggling. Kids are, growing up, to hear one person having depression was a shocking news. Now it's almost the norm where more and more students are being addled with depression medication and anxiety medication. So we need to look at what's causing all these things instead of just going back to the same talking points every time a horrific outcome happens, only to forget about it the next second. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Byer, if you'd like to go ahead and give your closing statement, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Catherine. And thank you to the League of Women Voters. I really appreciate your putting this on for us every 2 years. It's an essential part of our democracy. And thanks for being flexible with me. I'm actually in a rented room in Seattle, Washington right now, part of a 2-day meeting of all the fusion industry companies out here, because we're trying to get it away from fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can and give us the energy to take carbon out of the air. I want to thank Karina and Teddy for again showing up and being with me. This is what makes democracy strong. Karina, thanks for the shout out of my 1,000% tax on the assault weapons. I really like the idea. It's not the same as taxing cars, which I obviously know something about. It's understanding that when we have a filibuster that prevents us from doing so many things, it's prevented us from banning the assault weapons that like 80% of Americans want to ban. So we just want to make it, if we can't ban it, well, we can do a tax with only 51 votes. So it gave us a politically sensible way to try to keep. There's 2 terrible attacks in Uvalde, Texas, and in Buffalo were both 18-year-olds who bought the assault weapon within 24 hours of killing all those people. And they were able to buy cheap assault weapons and to finance them through the gun shops. That's what that is attempting trying to do. I love my job. We try to put people over politics every day in every way that we can. I've had many different leadership jobs in my 72 years, but this is the best because you get to be a change agent each and every day and try to look, how do you make a difference on suicide prevention or endangered species or climate change or all the people in our community that need food every morning. I've been dedicated to getting rid of the filibuster because right now so much of our politics is stopped when you need 60 votes in a very divided country. Obviously, we want the country to be not divided as it is, but I just want to thank all of you and thank everybody, especially at Goodwin House for listening, for giving me this opportunity to try to make a change in your lives. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Byer. Thank you for participating tonight. I hope we'll get to hear more from you as well as the other candidates in the near future as well. All right. If the other candidates are willing to stay with us a little bit longer, we do have some more time, and I would be honored to put a few more questions to you.
Sure, I'll stick around.
Absolutely.
All
We'll
right.
sit down.
Okay, well, let me start with a question, another question on education. Do you think Congress should take action to protect curriculum from attempts by the state governments to restrict what can be taught about race and gender? What books are available to students in our schools? And if so, what action would you take? Ms. Lipsman, you're next for the first question.
So I think it's important that we teach our kids basic skills. Right now, we have seen, especially with schools closing during COVID, our children have suffered the most. We've seen developmental issues come about because children were not able to be in person and learn in person to understand basic things like sarcasm or emotions, especially those in elementary school. I can only imagine what it would be like if I came to this country not speaking the language, and then I had to go in front of a virtual Zoom class, not understanding what my teacher was saying, but then also having my mother, who was working full time, make sure that I'm sitting in front of the computer and doing things. So I think that we've seen a lot of issues with COVID, and with that, we've also seen, as I had mentioned before, the lowering of standards. So I think it's something that we really need to focus on from a federal and a state perspective, and I think there should be a healthy partnership there so that we can teach our kids basic math skills, basic English and writing skills and reading, and then history, all of history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, this is what allows us to move forward as a country and learn from the past. And then I also believe that parents should have a choice in what schools their child attends. And the money should be following the child, not the school. Not only is that better for the child because they can their parents know what is best for them in terms of learning and thriving, but it's also great for teachers because it becomes a competitive landscape for them to choose which school they want to teach at. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart, and I look forward to working on the federal level with the states and ensuring that our curriculum it continues to raise the standards and our kids are thriving, and this is the future of our country.
Thank you, Mr. Ficre.
Sure. One of the things that I really strongly believe in is community empowerment above and beyond, centralized decision making. And education is at the heart of that too. We've gotten into this place where we keep outsourcing more and more of our decision making, more and more of our money and our resources to DC, and then hoping to get some type of a fair bargain back, which we never do. And this is why things get politicized. We should be able to make decisions as much as possible where we live. What is right for one part of the country might not necessarily be right for another part of the country. And so these things have become needlessly politicized. And every time there's one party that gains power, we go one extreme. And then when the other party gains power, we go to the other, and it's whiplash back and forth. And it creates all types of animosity and antagonism, and it keeps the country in perpetual friction. And there's no need for that. Ultimately, again, we should have more and more of our decisions being made by us, we the people. Government's supposed to be working for us, not dictating our lives. So the government has no position, no place outlawing or dictating what needs to be what cannot be taught or what can be taught. Those decisions, as much as possible, should be made by the communities where we live at. So whether it's the issue of women's choice or education, leave that to the individuals and communities where we live, instead of having this oversized government that's involved in almost every facet of our lives now. And the same government, by the way, that's captive to moneyed interests and not really paying attention to our interests as Americans. Thank you.
Thank you. Now that there are just two of you, it's more of a back and forth. So you'll also get to answer first on the next question, which is, what protections do you think are appropriate to take or expand for LGBTQ plus youth and adults in this country? Mr. Fikre, you get this one again first.
Sure. Yeah, I believe ultimately that the decisions that people make with respect to who they love and how they want to identify, that is their choice and their decision. So any actions that are being implemented that infringe upon that, that is something that we must firmly speak up against. I believe, as a person of faith, I believe in freedom of free will. The God that I cherish gives us free will, and who are we to try to act gods to other people and impose our will upon others? So, to that extent, there should be minimal, if zero, involvement in terms of restricting people's abilities to choose who they love, who they want to be with, how they want to identify. That's I chalk that up to personal choice, and it's not this issue should not be dictated to by government or become fodder for political infighting, like has been over the past how many years. And again, there's a reason for that. As long as we're at each other's throats and we're being pit against each other based on our differences, the one thing that most of us have in common which is economic in nature, that gets put to the back seat, and we end up fighting based on our differences. And that's the deception of our politics, and that's what we need to get away from. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Litzman?
Thank you so much for that question. So someone who's come from an oppressive regime, obviously individual rights are very important to me. And I don't believe that the federal government should be mandating or dictating anything. And the federal government should make it okay for people to love each other and to get married if their state allows it. But the rest should be up to the state. And I support marriage equality, and I look forward to being in Congress to keep the government out of the bedroom. And I mean, come on, why is the federal government meddling in those businesses anyway? So I think people should love who they love and be able to express themselves freely without any government intervention. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. All right. So then the first question, the next question goes to you first, and changing tax a little bit. What response do you think Congress should take to recent OPEC actions to reduce oil production?
I'm sorry, the question's to me? What was the question again? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Computers are freezing just a little bit.
Yeah, sorry, there's a little lag.
What response do you think Congress should take to the recent OPEC actions to reduce oil production?
So I think that, back to my earlier statement on energy independence, and we have the resources here in the United States to be able to support our own oil production and not import oil from countries like Venezuela or Saudi. And a lot of that oil is actually probably a lot dirtier than the oil here in the United States. We should also be looking to manufacture more solar components here in the United States versus purchasing it from China, who uses slave labor to do the manufacturing, and also Africa, who's using child slave labor to mine for rare earth minerals. So we should be doing a lot more in the United States to create more energy independence and put our men and women in high-paying quality jobs, but then also have less reliance on other countries for our oil. And this is something that I think the current administration has failed us on, and that's why we've seen the increase in gas prices. It's not President Putin's fault. It's not anyone else's fault. It's the fact that we've stopped the expansion of the Keystone XL pipeline, and now we're relying on other countries for our sources of energy. So thank you so much.
Mr. Fikre?
Sure. So, OPEC is just emblematic of on a broader, on a micro level, exactly what's taking place throughout the world in terms of the consolidation of so much commerce in the hands of a few. And so the same thing is happening almost across every economic sector, including within the refineries. You have a handful of players, the Exxons, the BPs of the world, that are able to monopolize refineries, and then that's a lot of the inflationary increases at gas pumps was because of the lack of competition at refineries. OPEC it's very easy when they reduce the prices. Reduce outflow, but we don't pay attention to the fact that there's other components within the supply chain that's leading to this level of sticker shock whenever we're filling up a gas. So if we have any hope of lowering the price of energy, is to, as much as possible, induce competition across the board, and to get away from this top-down, corporatization of the global commerce, and decentralize and empower more. For example, Ms. Lipsman was talking about refineries here in America. Well, let's make sure that whatever is being pumped here in America does not just go out into the global marketplace, because whatever we increase, that becomes a fungible commodity. So it will have no impact in terms of lowering gas or lowering energy, unless we're able to actually make sure that is being used here in America. But ultimately, we have to be able to get away from our reliance on OPEC and actually create a sustainable source of energy that is not, again, top down and corporatized, and actually has a competition within that sector, instead of that sector being dominated into the hands of a very few players that end up replaying or reprising the very same paradigm where there's more and more cost increases.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. I think we have time for one last question before your closing statements. So as you may be aware, with Virginia's ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, two-thirds majority of states have now ratified it. It's been passed, but is not yet part of the Constitution. What is your position on adding the Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, and what, if any, action would you take towards that end? Mr. Fieber. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted still.
If the voters here in the 8th Congressional District are, entrust me with their votes, I will support that. This is, I think, a simple yes or no, and I would support that proposition. One of the fundamental aspects of my political campaign is having equality of opportunity across all the social divides. One of the things that I really learned over the two and a half years of homelessness is that, the more we focus on the narrow things that we want, instead of looking at the collective whole, then it just creates a paradigm where we're fighting for our individual rights without realizing that our rights are tied in inextricably to the rights of other people. So we had to approach these things not from a me perspective, but a collective we. Part of, a long time ago, a certain politician said that it's not about red states or blue states. It truly is not. It's about all of us. And so by ensuring that, the equality across the board, then, it's something that would benefit the whole of society, not just the few that is being aimed at. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Lipsman?
Yes, so I support equality. I think that everyone should be able to have a choice to be who they want to be, to love who they want to love, to express themselves in the manner they want to express themselves in. I mean, that's the beauty of America. That's the beauty of democracy. And that's not something that we should take away from people. These are individual people's rights. And I think we should ensure that we're supporting people as they navigate through this and instead of demoralizing them. And I support the House Joint Resolution that removes the deadline for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. And it's up to the states now. And as I've said before, we need to focus on having less government intervention and not more. And the ratification of this process is one that balances the federal action with state action. And if the states need more time, that's great. And I think that's something that as we go into Congress, we'll have more of an opinion on. So thank you so much for that.
All right. With that, let's move into closing statements. You will each have 2 minutes. So Ms. Lipson, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Sorry, I was trying to
Right.
get off mute. Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you all for having us here tonight. This has truly been a pleasure to be here, especially with other women, because I don't get that chance too often. So thank you again for putting this on. And as you can see, I'm ready on day one to keep America safe. Our biggest threats are not climate change. They're Russia, who wants to take over the world, and China, who is eating us for lunch when it comes to manufacturing. I'm working for you because I am you. I'm asking for your vote because I feel your pain. I pay my own rent. I pump my own gas. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I have fought for every single thing that I have. And I will fight for your vote, and I will fight for you in the halls of Congress. And we have heard continued broken promises from Congressman Beyer. We have record high inflation, record high gas prices, record high supply chain problems. Promises have been made and promises have been broken. I'm not the party. I will never vote 100% with the party, unlike Don Beyer has. And I will vote with the people of Virginia. And I have made a promise that I will hold at least one town hall meeting a month to where I bring issues from Congress to the people so that we can all decide in unison how we want to vote, because it's all about the people. It needs to get back to that. So I ask for your vote on November 8th to bring common sense and civility back to Congress and to get the political elite and the career politicians out, because we're tired of the status quo. So to learn more about me, please visit karinaforcongress.com. And again, thank you so much for this evening.
Thank you. Right, Mr. Ficre?
Sure. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting me to this forum. It's been a great honor. Of course, I've already talked about that. The number one priority that I have, if the voters in the 8th Congressional District elect me, is to focus on securing our economic fairness for that's inclusive for all Americans and for all Virginians. But there's something else beyond that that's really compelling me to run. I'm originally from Ethiopia, and I saw my homeland being gutted by tribal politics. That's being gutted to this day by tribal politics, where people forgot about the common humanity and focus on our for me to get away from us versus them, looking at this world through the prism of our differences and disavowing the soft apartheid that is balkanizing America into a land of us versus them on steroids. And one particular instance highlighted this for me and shifted my mind away from this type of thinking. When I was in a homeless shelter in South Carolina, in Greenville, one day I woke up and I saw a 7-year-old white girl by the name of Samantha eating amongst fellow homeless people. And that particular moment, my heart shattered. And I didn't see a gender, I didn't see color, I didn't see ideology, I saw a child. And that's what we've forgotten, and that's what we keep forgetting and overlooking when we keep focusing on our differences. And sadly, our political process has evolved into weaponizing and leveraging the pains of people in order to collectively blame other people. And it creates this us versus them dynamic that makes change impossible. So we need to get beyond that and focus on what we have in common, and go towards empathy and love towards one another instead of acrimony and antagonism. You can find out more by going to my website, which is Fikre, FIKRE, 4va.com. Thank you.
All right. Thank you both so much for participating tonight. I think the voters of District 8 have learned a lot about all of the candidates. On behalf of the League, we really appreciate you coming and sharing your views with everyone. I also like to thank the audience attendees, both for coming and for submitting questions. Unfortunately, we can never get to all of them, but hopefully there'll be additional opportunities for people to address any questions that are burning for them. With that, I would like to say good night. And again, just thank you very much.
Thank you all and good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed night.